Now, I'm a hunter who hunts wild boar specifically. For those of you who don't know, boar are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of at least 10 pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not really hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them and control the population. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large animals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. After saving up the money for an expensive scope, I took it to a range and sighted in. There was an area that was actually peppered with boars that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, and there were many spots I could set up that overlooked a large clearing. Now, the night started uneventful. It was mostly me tinkering with my new scope, cycling through the settings and testing it out. I was a little impatient, I'll admit, and I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't even legal for hunting deer. I moved to another spot nearby that probably wasn't much better than my first, but at least it gave me something to do. I left the old tree behind and clambered up to a new location. After an hour or so of looking around, I started to notice something odd. This spot didn't have much animal activity at all. I was only a couple 100 yards away from where I've been, but there and here were both fairly dead. There were no rabbits or owls, and the deer that I'd seen before were hundreds of yards now from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night? It had been filled with activity during the day, so this didn't make much sense to me. I had arrived at around 10 p.m., and it was about 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up. I didn't want the whole night to be a waste, so I thought maybe I'd set up a target or two before I left, take some practice shots with my new toy, and just call it a night. While lost in thought, I heard a strange crunch echo from the ground near the position I had been in previously. I panned my scope over, and I saw the silhouette of what looked like a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly a night vision scope fully, it's more like a thermal scope. It's kind of like a black and white version of what you'd see in science fiction movies. It mainly shows the outline and shape of whatever you were looking at, with solid color filling in that shape, and it was registering the heat of creatures compared to the area around them. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little, and I remember jolting a bit when I saw that what I was looking at was not a bear, it appeared to be a man. I assumed that it was a bear because it was so low and hunched over, and it couldn't be a game warden. I would have seen the headlights coming up from the road from where I was perched. Where would he have walked from anyways, even if he was? I was 30 miles away from anything, and I was on public lands. I was about to call out to him when I adjusted my sights and noticed that he was naked. No shoes, no pants, nothing. I remember being disturbed by his movements. He was twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree like a bear. Palming what appeared to be the same tree I had been at earlier. The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Did he know where I was? He then did something that I still have nightmares about today. He squatted down and placed his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. That's when I heard it, a voice coming from that direction. A very compelling female voice.
Help me, I'm lost.
There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. I was silent as could be. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet, and I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at what appeared to be another person. It went against everything I'd been taught about firearms. Was this just some crazy guy, and was he really lost? Maybe he'd been wandering around for a while and he'd just completely lost it out in the woods, but if that were the case, then why was his voice so feminine?
Help, please. I can't walk.
The voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. He had been moving along the ground well enough that I had mistaken him for a bear. Of course, he, or whatever this thing was, could definitely walk. It was like this thing was trying to lure me to him by using a woman's voice. Now, luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear well ahead of seeing this thing, and I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad or something, but I didn't really care at this point. I took my eyes off of this thing for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap, and it was such a small noise, but horrifyingly loud in the dead of the night. I scrambled for my rifle to look back in the direction of the person or whatever it was, and to my horror, he was in the same position as before, but something had changed. His face was now staring in my direction, and I swear I saw a smile. It was even more horrible looking, as the thermal scope has an effect that makes animals' eyes appear almost a whitish gray. How the hell had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have easily been at least 150 yards away. At this point, I'm not ashamed to say that I was petrified. "Fuck off!" I screamed in that direction. It stood straight upright, and it hit me with how tall and skinny it actually was. This man-like thing was at least 6 feet tall and very lean. He took a couple of long strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head into the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't necessarily threatened me. I mean, if I shot him, I'd be in a world of trouble. What would I actually tell the police? "Hey, I saw a creepy naked man 150 yards away, and I shot him because he was scary." Yeah, that's not going to hold up very well. I was unwilling and unready to actually shoot someone unless I really had to. He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. "Go away," I screamed in his direction, and he stayed on all fours, and this time I had my sight trained on the very center of him. His eyes were just above the grass, and he looked like some kind of tiger perched and hunting for food. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice had cracked a little bit on that last warning. I was terrified as we stared at each other in some kind of showdown, both refusing to move. I wasn't going to drop my rifle and let this thing take any more long strides towards me, especially after it had heard a buckle make a sound from so far away. Who knows how far something like this could run in just a few seconds. It felt like forever that we sat there, but in an instant he bolted left towards the tree line opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope, he was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I decided to send another bullet sailing high in his direction. That's when I chose that there was no time like the present to leave. I wasn't waiting for whatever that was to come back, and I wasn't far from my truck, and I wanted to get out of there. I could hear it in the distance, yelling in this weird sound that could have been a laugh or maybe a cry, and I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck, breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab, but kept the rifle in the passenger seat and sped off. Now I was not going to take any extra time getting out of there. For the longest time, I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some kind of deranged crackhead wandering through the woods. I reported it to the Fish and Game Center, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone, which wasn't really helpful, and I also never received any update from them. It wasn't until I told this story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about Wendigos, Skinwalkers, and the like. My nephew was terrified of my story as we were only about 50 miles from where this whole thing happened, and he was so spooked that his mom, my cousin, actually had to take him home, which definitely annoyed her. I'm not sure that what I saw definitely was a Wendigo or Skinwalker, and I'm not saying that such a thing exists, but if it does, I may have very well seen it and dodged a bullet that night myself.